These are a couple of examples of the project that we are going to do today. You can see that the bail on both of the pieces is metal clay, and there are a few little accent pieces of metal also applied to the surface. And all of these are constructed with a riveting technique. So this is a brass nail that goes through both sides of the bail and is riveted with a hammer on the back side. And these pieces also are riveted on the front side. You don't see the rivet because it's soldered to the back of the small piece. So we will start with the metal clay portion first, and I'm using as my textures a carved texture plate that I made myself. This was a sheet of baked polymer which I carved with a carving tool. Here are some other examples of texture plates that you can make yourself. This one was made just by using the back side of a metal ruler to create a geometric design. This one is very dirty because I've used it many times, but it was drawn with a ball stylus into a sheet of soft polymer clay. Here is one that also was drawn with sculpting tools. And when you design a texture plate that you really like, you can also make the reverse image of that. So I carved this plate here, and this was a polymer mixture of Bacon Bend, Premo, and ultralight clay all mixed together. That's one of my favorite carving mixtures. And then I used another sheet of Bacon Bend to take the positive off of the mold, and that's another fun thing that you can do. So I'm going back to, this will be the one that I'm going to use today. And this project can be done with either the copper, the bronze, or the silver metal clays if you have the equipment to work in those materials. Today I am working with PMC3, which is the fine silver. And I'm going to take a piece of the clay, and always keep any excess wrapped up tight so it doesn't dry out on you. And metal clay does not need as much handling and conditioning as polymer. You want to handle it very little because you don't want to dry it out. And I'm rolling this about 1 millimeter thick. And then when we use polymer clay molds with polymer, we use water as a resist. When we use molds with metal clay, we have to use an oil product. Some people use olive oil. I like to use hand salve, and I just get a little on my finger and a little on the mold. And this doesn't interfere if you want to take this back and use it for polymer later. The oils just kind of work their way in and evaporate or dissolve. They do not affect polymer, so it's okay to use the same mold with either material. Now I'm working on a silicone sheet because the metal clay would stick to my tile, and I don't want that. So I'm going with just a straight design here, taking out skinnier there will be good, and maybe a slight curve on each end. Like that. Now, it takes a little bit of work to train yourself to always put your metal clay back in the wrapper, because if you're used to polymer clay, you know that it won't ever dry out and nothing will go wrong while it waits for you, but that's not the case with metal clay. You don't want it to dry out. Now I have my piece trimmed to the shape that I want, and I have folded a piece of cardstock to slightly larger than the thickness that my pendant piece is going to be. And I'm going to form this piece over, and I want to turn it from the side a little bit so that I can make sure that both of the sides hanging down will be the same length, and look at it from each direction to try and get it as straight as possible and as even as possible. And now that is ready to set aside to dry. If you have a candle warmer, coffee cup warmer, those are great little tools to lay your metal clay on to dry. Otherwise, you can just let it sit and it will air dry naturally. This piece is a little thicker, so in the natural state it would need to dry for about an hour, but on a candle warmer or mug warmer it will take about 20 minutes. Okay, I have rolled out another piece of clay, this time a little thinner. Last time I wanted a thicker piece for the bail, so I had my clay about 3 or 4 cards thick. Now these are just decorative elements, so I can use a little thinner bit of clay. So I have number 2s for my cards here. And once again, I'm going to add a little bit more oil to the surface of my mold sheet. Roll across. And I have just a little square cutter because my bail design is pretty square. I'm going to use this one, and cutting 4 pieces there. That just barely fit. All the excess taken away. And then let these dry also. Okay, our pieces have had time to dry, and you can see that as I took this off and let it sit on the warming tray, it got a little warped, but that's okay. We'll have time to adjust for those sorts of things later. So the next step is to take a very, very fine grade sandpaper, and I like to use these little sponges, and work on all the edges. You can see that there's a bit of a burr raised or a roughness where the blade cut through, and so we want to polish all of that up nicely before firing. Do those. Now if you choose, you can also sand a little bit on the textured surface. That will widen out the lines. If the piece is to be dipped in liver of sulfur to add a patina, and then you polish off the high points, so you will want to do this step if you choose to do the patina. Now my little pieces, just a little on each side. Be very careful because at this point the clay is dry. It's called bisque, and it's very brittle and can break on you. In which case, all is not lost. You can use slip, which is a thinner version, kind of a paste-like metal clay that can be painted into joints, used for seams. It also comes in a syringe, and you can use that to do more delicate filigree type designs. Okay, so I will finish the last 2, and I'm also going to drill holes in 2 of the 4 decorative pieces. right through the center. And this is a drill bit that is the equivalent of 16 gauge wire, which is the size of the brass nails that we will use for our rivets. So I also want to drill through one of these, and I'm going to slide my sanding pad in there for a little support to give me something to drill against. I like to make my own little drill bit handles with clay, and this is inserted into the clay log. After baking it together, I pull that out and glue it back in with a drop of super glue. It will eventually fail, but you can always re-glue it, and they're usually durable for some length of time. I've turned out the lights for this next section so that hopefully the camera will be able to see the color that we will be looking for in the metal clay. I have a butane torch, and it's filled, and ignite that, and as you begin to heat the dried clay pieces, there was first a bit of smoke and then some flame, and the flame will extinguish, and unfortunately the torch should not. Okay. Now, after the flames are gone, you will want to keep the torch moving across the pieces, and we can see that they're glowing sort of peachy pink, and that's the color that we want to hold the metal for the recommended time. For pieces this small, it's only about a minute. Larger pieces can be 2 to 3 minutes, and there are recommendations by the manufacturer based on the gram weight of your piece. I think that's about done. And we'll move over to the other piece, to our bale. Now you can see that that is opening up a little bit. As the clay is what's called sintered, usually it may curl up a little bit and shrink. In the case of a shaped piece like this, it may open up a little bit, and that's just fine. And again, I'm going to keep my torch on this and keep it glowing, in this case for about 2 minutes. Now the pieces are cooled, and you will notice that they are white looking rather than shiny like we usually think of silver. And so in order to bring up the silver shine, they need to be brushed with a brass brush. Brass bristles are actually quite soft, and we don't want anything harder than that, like a steel brush. That would be too abrasive for the metal clay. But you can see this is bringing up the silver shine, and what's happening is it's just being burnished. There's not a material or a powder that's coming off of it. It's just burnishing those crystals of silver to bring up the reflective quality. Now we're ready for soldering. Now I am going to put the brass nails on the back of the 2 pieces that have not been drilled. And this is easy paste solder, flows at the lowest temperature, and that is one that it will work with a small butane torch. And so I have here a cross-link tweezers, which helps with not having to hold your hand tightly, or helps keep things steady. So I have my nail set where I want it, and I'm applying the heat and waiting for the solder to flow. There it goes. You can see when the solder flows, it looks like liquid metal, shiny and wet and flowing. And you want to hold steady for just a couple seconds after the flame is removed so that the solder will harden up again. So there we have a decorative nail with a fancy head. And that's ready to go. I will finish up the other one, and then we will move on to our polymer portion of the pendant.